Grant Kosenjeti, who's just going to give us an official welcoming to this learning community. Thank you, Grant.
Okay, thank you so much, Pumza, and welcome everyone, to our learning process or initiative. This is one of the many, learning elements that we are undertaking. And can you hear me? Can you hear me, Pumza? Okay, all right. Sorry. Yes, so this is one of the many of the learning initiatives that we are undertaking. This is for the first time, in the history of GCE that we are having a one on gender, and we want to ensure that this space becomes more of a safe space. Everyone should feel comfortable, to share whatever their understanding of what gender means, and also be able to unlearn to learn. I think, we all, have to undergo all those processes. So let's keep our mind open and let's try to engage and interact. This is not just a dialogue. When we are talking, we do have other facilities in here that, you can use to raise questions to the people that will be presenting, but also issues that, we need to consider. So I welcome all of you. More specifically, our speakers, thank you so much. Those from GPE, I can see others from Ungai. Thank you so much for making time, and many others. So thank you so much and feel welcome. Let's engage, let's discuss. There is no wrong answer in this platform. We are all here to learn and to engage. So feel welcome. I will hand over to Pumza with the context setting. Over to you, Pumza.
Yes, thank you, Grant. Firstly, please just note, if anyone needs interpretation, it's available in all the GCE languages: Arabic, French, Spanish, and Portuguese. So just click by the icon below for the correct language channel. So why are we here, and why did we decide as GCE to set this gender learning community? The struggles in favor of the right to education include, in a central way, the elimination of all forms of inequality and inequity, and are aimed at building the necessary conditions so that the recognition of diversity to all is overcome, and where we ensure that no one is excluded. Patriarchal frameworks are essential ballast that prevents progress in constructing transformative societies. Due to the rise that we have seen of growing conservative movements, the political momentum of not closing gender disparity is at unprecedented levels. For this reason, it is urgent to move education towards cultures of human rights and with notions of equality and non-discrimination at the center of pedagogical action. As a global campaign for education thus far, we have adopted the gender strategy in 2021, as well as during the World Assembly in November. The GCE strategy includes gender inclusion as one of the two foundational asks. Additionally, we have the Sexuality Comprehensive Policy Motion that was also approved at the World Assembly. Today, we're gathered here at launching a co-learning space that supports us in integrating gender thematic areas in all our GCE advocacy activities. Therefore, we found this platform integral in strengthening the movement's capacity to mainstream gender through targeted gender-conscious learning and generating knowledge that is centralized around education sector through our three strategic pillars: transforming education, education emergencies, and education financing. Furthermore, the learning community aims to identify good practices within the movement to work to expose and draw policy attention to inequity, discrimination, and exclusion in the education space. Through this gender learner community, we hope to aim to cultivate a community and a safe space where GCE members, partners, and interested parties that are leading and participating in gender transformative education work, not to just be reactive, but to be proactive, working alongside each other to authentically collaborate and learn. Today's theme of the gender learning community is gender responsive education sector planning. We have a group of experts gathered here together to share their key learning spaces, the best practices, tools, and basically what best can we learn in the umbrella of GRESP. The first person that I'll be introducing is Teresa from FAWE, who will be setting the context in terms of Africa. Teresa, the platform is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Apologies, everybody. I'm having a cold, but I hope you can get to hear me well. My name is Teresa Omondi Adeto. I'm the Deputy Executive Director at FAWE, but also the Head of Programs. I'll take you through our presentation on gender vulnerability faced by boys and girls, just to set us off. 1 minute. Yes, there we are. So, despite the various efforts that have been made on gender parity in education, we still need a lot to be done. We still need a lot of work and efforts to put in place. And COVID-19 was not fair to us. It even made us go back a few years. All the gains we had made, some of them, we lost them during that difficult moment globally. So far we had education policies. I know like FAWE, we had really made some progress on the Just for CESA, that's the gender equality strategy for continental education of Africa. And now with the lockdown, all the meetings we had, all the influential education officials we had met, we had to lose traction. And when we came back, a lot of changes that happened, transfers had taken place in different government offices in African countries that we work with. So that's the kind of steps we made backwards because of the pandemic. And a lot of it being also in terms of capacity, enhancement of gender responsive budgeting, and also gender responsive institutions. Poverty, climate change, conflict, immigration, and the refugee status in the African region continues to broaden these gender equalities for both boys and girls. And I will be shortly sharing the experience we've had as FAWE. So the Forum for African Women Educationalists is a Pan-African regional organization that deals with girls' rights. Our mandate is basically to ensure that we have gender responsive policies, practices, attitudes, foster good innovations, gender responsive innovations, and also provide opportunity for African girls to prosper in their societies. Entry, retention of girls in school, and their transition to the highest level of education is our mantra, so that we see most of them getting to the highest level of education. It's been 30 years of doing this work, and we are based in those countries you can see in the map. A bit of the East African, almost all the countries in East Africa have joined have FAWE chapters. We have chapters in West Africa, Central, and also Southern Africa. We unfortunately don't have a chapter in North Africa. Hopefully, this is something we can achieve during our current strategic plan. So I was requested to just pick five gender parities that comes the top of our mind. Of course, the list is long. We tried to come up with this, the first one being the dropout rate. It's increasing. Part of what I was talking about, when the pandemic came, we lost even more. The UNESCO statistics, sorry, this is not UNICEF, UNESCO statistics show that before COVID, we had 32 million children out of school. During COVID and after, we added another 36. So we're at about 69 million children out of school. And you find that out of the estimated 244 million children of the youth age of 6 to 18 worldwide are out of school as at 2021. And some of this also generated up to 2022. The boys are mainly, most of them been recorded as dropping out because of jobs. And all this goes back to our gender norms. When the boys drop out, mostly they're joining paying jobs. They want to work. And so they want to make, because they are trained to be providers. So that's the first thing they think of. And those who already were working, when we took a break from schools, are having it difficult to now go back to school where there's no earning money. So that's a big challenge for the boys. Of course, drugs and substance abuse also affecting the boys higher. For the girls, the major dropout issues were on caregiving and taking care of their siblings, that is doing household chores. I mentioned some, water, firewood fetching, and a bit of joining their mothers in income generating activities. But you'll notice the same perspectives are different. The gender differences of why the boy is entering into income generating activities is very different from why the girl is also getting herself into income generating activities. We also still have a lot who dropped out, girls, because of child marriage, teenage pregnancies, and harmful traditional practices such as female genital mutilation. So the other thing we thought about is climate change. There's really been quite a bit of changes in our global climate, which has brought about prolonged droughts. For example, in Kenya, it's only until recently, early this year, that at least for the rains and the food, but it has heavily affected communities. And I believe it is the same story with many African countries. And with this, it means a lot of programs for schools have to be stalled or stopped. For example, programs affecting school feeding programs. If there's drought, it's very hard to maintain the school feeding program. I'm sorry for that. So they have to close school for the school feeding programs, and then would have provision of sanitary pads not there because of the poverty levels also created by the climate change. And we also end up not having gender-friendly services in schools. I mean, people who are out trying to address issues of food and nutrition, we know how that impacts the schooling program, how it even impacts resources in schools. And also, it also impacts on payment of education fees or any other education need. The third priority we thought of was the poor implementation of education policies in Africa. We know most African countries have very good education policies. They keep up to the African Union recommendation. They keep up to the different African charters, especially on the rights of children. But when it comes to implementation, that becomes the challenge. Many of them will blame budget allocation. Some will talk about human resource. Some will talk about lack of capacity. And in most places, it's just lack of political will to support these policies to make sure they're implemented so that we have gender responsive schools. There's also lack of enough personnel and motivated teachers. You realize in Africa, one of the least paid jobs as for teachers. And we all know without education, I was once in a workshop where one of the ministers of education, actually the minister of education for Zambia, said, teachers are like oxygen. If you don't have teachers, then you lack the oxygen of the society. And unfortunately, they are the least motivated. Then we also have limited or low quality learning materials. We are still struggling with aspects of gender responsive materials, which can encourage girls and boys to take up STEM subjects, which can encourage boys to take up roles which were not perceived to be male roles, or even for girls to take up roles that are male roles. So that kind of interchanging. There are still institutions that still do not have those gender responsive learning materials. And finally, I already talked about lack of gender responsive budgeting, which widens the gap of inequalities in education. On the fourth priority, we were looking at the negative attitude, cultural practices towards girls' education. And the first one, oops, I can't. Okay, sorry for that. Okay, we have, sorry. Yes, negative attitude towards girls' education is still entrenched in the African education system. The girls are still not the first choice for anyone who wants to invest in education, but there are communities that have tried to embrace girls joining school or being retained in school. Currently, the challenge we have is not more about entry into school, but more about retaining them in school. By age 9 to 13, they are ripe for those harmful practices, child marriages, teenage pregnancy. So I think currently the challenge is how to retain them past that very critical age, at least to the higher education. Then lack of gender responsive teachers and pedagogy, I've talked about that. Then girls still get less support from the community than boys to access education. I've mentioned that, and especially in enrolling in STEM. But there's also that contrary effect that the boys get. They get very harassed if they fail STEM, because they assumed, what type of a boy are you or a man are you who cannot get science subjects or math subjects? So in as much as the girls are being denied maybe the opportunity to take up science subjects, the same time the boys are really under a lot of pressure to perform. Yet maybe not all boys want to be scientists, maybe they want to be something else. And this has also brought in issues of stress, now issues of getting into drug abuse, issues of dropout of school because of the pressure. I remember when I was growing up, it's now today is when I remember why was my brother really being punished for, failing mathematics as compared to the rest of us? But this still continues up to today. I've talked about harmful traditional practices, one of them being the female genital mutilation. And then the boys also have been victims of cultural practices, especially those who go for long initiation ceremonies. Most of African countries, the holidays of August holiday and December holiday, boys are even taken to a secluded place after their circumcision sessions to be taught to be men. And that can really take quite a long time. And some of them live there when they have changed their mind about education, increasing also their level of dropout from school. Yes, the last one was war, armed conflict, and the global pandemic. I think the recent times have seen so many countries. I mentioned these countries, Burkina Faso, Sudan, Somalia, Ethiopia, because these are the countries we have chapters, and actually our programs had to stall in some of these countries or some regions of the country, for example, in Ethiopia and Nigeria. And this then means then we have to stop education programs because of the fear that children are not even going to school in some of those regions or in the countries where coup d'etats have happened or civil unrest. And we all know in every situation of conflict or pandemic, the first institutions to close or to suffer this are usually the education institutions. And boys are recruited into the armies to become, or the bandits, and girls are used as a weapon of wars, and mostly also vulnerable to gender-based violence, sexual harassment, and also all of them, both boys and girls, deprived of the right to education. So those are like kind of 5 priorities that I quickly picked on for our today's session. But like I said, there are many other reasons which are causing gender inequalities in school and in the education system in Africa. So we worked on the gender responsive education strategic, sector plans. That's the gender responsive education sector plans. And the role of FAWE was to identify influencers, identify education officers, and other key stakeholders to build their capacity to understand why should the education plans be gender responsive? Why should we have gender action plans? Why should we employ gender experts? Why should we give a gender analysis of what is happening in our education sector? Or why should we even have national consultations in different African countries to agree what are those issues that are affecting our boys and girls in school? It worked well in the sense that we had some memorandum of understanding with the part of the governments that we work with, for example, Kenya, Senegal, Zambia, Zimbabwe. We had at least a memorandum of understanding that we would be giving the ministries of education support as relates to gender matters. We also signed up partnership agreements with other stakeholders in terms of coming together so that we can pool our resources together towards supporting education in Africa. We've really trained quite some number of teachers. I think as of now, we are 6,000 spread in different parts of Africa. on gender responsive pedagogy. We know the teacher determines whether the students will stay in class or not by the examples they give, how they treat them, how they respond to their needs. We've done capacity building also on inclusion of gender in planning, implementation, and evaluation of the education sector plans. We've had a few stakeholders committing and being able to integrate the gender responsive sector planning considerations into their strategic plans and also into their programming. What has not worked so far, adoption of the reentry policy, it's still a struggle. There are those who still think, for example, for teenage pregnant mother, there are those who are arguing that if you get the teenage mothers back to school, we are encouraging more of them to become pregnant, which is an argument that is really stale from the point of saying it, because we know that no one just gets pregnant intentionally. And we also know that there are several other things that are preventing these girls to protect themselves, especially on issues of comprehensive sexual education, so that they are able to protect themselves, and also speaking to the boys so that we are able, because the current pregnancies that were recorded during COVID time were not necessarily for older men, but it was teenage to teenage. So we have teenage fathers and now we have teenage mothers in our society. So most governments are still struggling with accepting the reentry policy. There's slow integration of the climate change programs and accepting of refugees. In fact, recently I was in a meeting where we were asking ourselves, currently there are certain generations of children who no longer even perceive themselves as refugees, because the people who are really refugees who ran away were their great-grandfathers or grandfathers. But currently they are still being treated as refugees, being denied opportunities because and we're telling ourselves, is it time that we change how we view these children? Because they know nowhere else but where they are being hosted as refugees. And lastly, limited financial resources and the limited goodwill from some of the governments has also caused us not to have very effective plans. So ladies and gentlemen, that was the presentation for today. I look forward to any questions or further interaction. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Teresa. If you have any questions for Teresa or any of the panelist speakers, we'll be waiting first for all the other speakers, and we'll have a question and answer session at the end. You're welcome to raise your hand or to put your questions in the chat box. The next speaker is a student representative who's coming from WITS. They are a South African higher education. They belong to the South African Higher Education Queer Alliance, and their name is Penny Shabalala.
Good afternoon. How are you? Can I just check if you can hear me? Okay. My name is Chabala, and I am the National Student Mobilizer of the South African Alliance, which is a forum that seeks to organize queer formations and movements within South Africa to mobilize students in higher institutions of learning, where we focus on discussing, or rather queering the discourse in higher education and ensuring that the conversations, research topics, as well as the curriculum is very inclusive and seeks to address issues that are faced by our students, issues that are faced by our students that are from vulnerable communities such as the LGBTQIA community. So I'm going to look particularly at the importance of diversity learning curriculum. It is very important that our curriculum is inclusive of the marginalized communities, because now curriculum should accommodate everyone regardless of their backgrounds, and it should give students and learners a sense of belonging and identity. So in our movement, what we look at is that as soon as we include various people and we move away from heteronormativity in the approach of creating curriculum, that's when we accommodate people from different backgrounds. So the curriculum must address issues that are always faced in social backgrounds of students and learners within the education system. So the diversity comes in this conversation because it is very important that diversity is seen through representation. So representation means that there should be representation of various backgrounds within curriculum. Students must have a sense of belonging and identifying within this curriculum. So meaning that when students see fair representation within the curriculum, it makes it very easy for everyone to fit in the system and to be part of the system. But it is not something that can be attained easily because it starts in higher education where teachers are doing their degrees in education, where teachers are still doing pedagogy of teaching, pedagogical practicing. That's when it's when teachers should be taught about inclusivity, equity, and equality. Also understanding the difference between equity and equality, because equality means that we can apply the same thing to everyone, but equity means that if someone has headache, we give them pills for headache. If someone has stomach ache, we give them what's suitable for stomach ache, meaning that we should meet everyone's needs regardless of their background and how different they are. So an inclusive curriculum for us is to see students learning inclusivity and taking it back to the communities, because these issues do not only start in the education system, but before they become systematic, they start at home where they come from. They start in the communities where they live and spaces that they always find themselves in. So moving to my second point, where I'd like to speak about diversity in learning curriculum and how it will allow students to have expression within the curriculum. So the power of expression within curriculum, because students must be able to come up with new ideas. They should understand that time and generations change. So students are different, and as time changes, it means which means that it must be able to give expression to students regardless of how they identify, how they present themselves, or rather how they find that diversity in this sense means that the learning curriculum must allow students to be able to critique where possible, to say this is what promotes, or this is what promotes divisions, or this is heteronormative, or this is to have a voice when they feel like the curriculum is being a little unequal, or not giving them enough expression. So
Hello, Penny.
yes.
Yeah, we had lost you for a second, but you're fine now.
Okay, can you just remind me what's the last thing you had so that I can just go back there?
You were talking about the learning curriculum and the homogeneous and heterogeneous aspect of how you must be able to critique the curriculum in the diverse aspects that you want.
Okay, okay, thank you very much. So it is very important that our curriculum gives students expression to be able to critique where possible, to say, no, this certain practice is not inclusive, this certain practice is exclusionary. So it must give expression to students, must find expression within the curriculum to be able to voice out, because if a curriculum is just kind of imposed to students, it is very problematic because it does not meet the dynamics of this of their social background. Because if we have different people in the society, it means that curriculum must be able to accommodate those different views according to their backgrounds. And I said now, I was also saying, as an alliance, South African Higher Education Queer Alliance, we sat down and we came with some sort of compartmentalization of the alliance. And in doing so, it was more of, we said, let's come up with 5 councils that can address this issue, because we feel like it is our role as to challenge this issue, because that's where teachers, professionals are trained. So if we implement this kind of inclusivity within higher education, it means when pedagogical practitioners go to schools to teach students, they'll already know about inclusivity, and it would be very easy for them to teach, to be active participants of an inclusive curriculum, because we also need teachers to be active in an inclusive curriculum. So we have the South African Higher Education Queer Alliance peer review journal. We also have a transformation desk. We have a disciplinary council. We have a national student council and an advisory council. And this councils, the SAECA peer review journal, is to know what's going on in the society, is to be in touch with the issues that are being faced by learners or other people within the curriculum. Our does not only look at learners per se, but it also looks at the role of educators in having a diverse curriculum, because we can have it in paper, but when it comes to implementation, we are going to need an active participation of the pedagogical practitioners, or rather teachers within the teaching system. Just to go to another point, before we move to another point, South African Higher Education Queer Alliance aims to achieve a queer-friendly space in South African higher learning institutions, also influence the Department of Basic Education, that's basic education from grade 1 to matric, and our aim is also looking at accommodating both tertiary and basic education. Last but not least, I want to look at the need for transformation in education, and also look at creating safe spaces in the learning system. So the possible ways for us to transform the curriculum would be having what we call safe zones. Safe zones training is when staff members, everyone that is part of the teaching system, are trained on how to save, on how to create an atmosphere of acceptance. So a possible solution would be to come up with a training program that would aim at training teachers within the system to say, this is how inclusivity works, this is how diversity works, because diversity comes with a lot of things. For example, pronouns. Diversity can also speak to pronouns, because if people are diverse, it means people have different pronouns. And it would be this training that would train teachers that we don't use gender normative slurs or gender normative pronouns, when we refer to students. You don't assume someone's pronouns based on their gender identity, but you ask for their pronoun. Those would be ways that would educate teachers to say, if you're in classroom, you should be mindful and you should be careful of how you approach your learners to create a diverse and safe learning. So creating safe spaces for transformation in the education system, but this would need training and dedication for staff members in the education system to be allies to these communities, to be allies to the struggles that are faced by marginalized students, marginalized learners that come from marginalized backgrounds. Just to conclude, to not waste your time, let me look.
1 minute.
Okay, I'm so sorry for taking time. Okay, in conclusion, I'd just like to say, we live in a world that has different people, different struggles, and different lived experiences. And education is the hope in so many parts of Africa for the next generations, or for our young people. be involved in creating safe spaces in the education system. With that being said, I'd like to thank the invitation. On behalf of the South African Higher Education Queer Alliance, we are very honored to have been involved in this campaign and share our 2 cents. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Penny, for highlighting the importance of diversity and how education is so integral on how we teach people and how we refer to each other, and creating co-learning spaces that are safe for everyone. The next speaker is from CLADA. Her name is Gabriela Aruntugai, and she'll be sharing basically the regional context. So now we're moving from country level to more of a regional perspective on what are the civil society's action on gender and inclusion, what's been working for CLADE, and all those processes that you guys have been working on advocating for inclusion and equity in the context of Latin America. Thank you, Gabrielle.
Thank you, Funsa. Well, my presentation will be in Spanish, but we can discuss in English. Okay. Perfecto. Bueno, creo que las intervenciones anteriores han sido muy inspiradoras, y también, ¿no?, desde la voz de los estudiantes nos han comentado un poco estas preocupaciones, ¿no? Entonces, desde CLADE hemos elaborado, desarrollado prácticas inspiradoras para escuchar las diversas voces de los actores desde la sociedad civil. Y quería comenzar diciendo que los temas de género siempre han ocupado el centro de los debates de la campaña latinoamericana por el derecho a la educación. Y desde los inicios de la red se han realizado eventos, estudios, publicaciones y formación sobre las relaciones entre género y la educación, también de forma interseccional. Y en los últimos 2 años se ha intensificado el trabajo de formación de los miembros de CLADE en este tema, ¿no? Porque es necesario tener una formación, una sociedad civil fortalecida para poder trabajar y velar por el cumplimiento de los derechos en educación y género. Entonces, hemos tenido formación sobre la transversalización de la perspectiva de género. Se creó un grupo de trabajo de género, se está construyendo una política institucional de género, y también se ha brindado una formación sobre presupuestos educativos sensibles al género. Entonces, en el 2021 iniciamos con este ciclo de formación sobre cómo transversalizar el enfoque de género a los miembros de la CLADE, ¿no? Tenemos 5 módulos en los que hemos trabajado eso. Luego también, en base a esta formación, surge la iniciativa de crear un grupo de trabajo integrado por 38 personas, y estos encuentros son de forma semanal. Entonces, trabajamos las preocupaciones que la sociedad civil tiene en temas de género, ¿no? Y en el 2022 hemos elaborado la política institucional de género de la CLADE. Si bien ya teníamos ciertos acuerdos previos, ahora esto está de forma institucional, ¿no? Y finalmente, en enero y marzo de este año, hemos elaborado formación sobre presupuesto sensible al género, y actualmente estamos elaborando un protocolo para ello, ¿no? Como les comenté, es importante una sociedad civil preparada, que sepa también de estos presupuestos, ¿no?, en la política pública, que no son neutrales, que tienen un enfoque, y ahí es donde sociedad civil entra a monitorear y velar por el cumplimiento de estos compromisos. Entonces, lo importante de esta política institucional de CLADE es fortalecer la equidad de género en el quehacer cotidiano y la acción política de la red, como un paso indispensable hacia la igualdad de género. Después también, esta es una política con perspectiva decolonial, comunitaria e inclusiva, que asume la interseccionalidad como estrategia analítica para poder evidenciar cómo los diversos sistemas de opresión se imbrincan a partir del patriarcado, esta estructura articuladora de otras opresiones profundizando las desigualdades, ¿no? Y finalmente se busca transversalizar y especificar las perspectivas de género en diversos ámbitos como el estratégico, el político programático, político institucional y administrativo financiero de la red. Y además de fortalecer, ¿no?, la perspectiva de género al interior de la red, es fundamental incidir para cambiar las políticas, ¿no?, construyendo a la superación de la discriminación de género. Entonces, tenemos que en América Latina y el Caribe casi todos los estados han asumido compromisos internacionales por la superación de las desigualdades de género, pero no todos cuentan con políticas y presupuestos adecuados para transformar el discurso político en práctica concreta. Entonces vemos que la educación puede tener un rol central en la transformación de estereotipos, roles y prácticas de género, y de ahí la importancia de incidir por una educación no sexista y no discriminadora. Y eso lo hemos hecho a partir de la participación en diversos congresos, estrategias de comunicación y nuestra experiencia de incidencia contra la violencia de género en escuelas rurales de Haití, Honduras y Nicaragua. Y ahora especifico un poquito más lo que he mencionado, ¿no? Tenemos que hemos participado en el proceso de formación para fortalecer el desarrollo de capacidades y apoyo de líderes y activistas del aprendizaje y la educación de adultos, ampliando la comprensión y conocimiento sobre la educación con personas jóvenes y adultos, que son la EPIJA, y desarrollando competencias en su promoción, ¿no? Este programa facilitó el intercambio de experiencias, el aprendizaje colaborativo y la creación de redes. Y bueno, en la 10ª YALA se organizó en la Casa Árabe para específicamente trabajar temas de educación de adultos y el desarrollo, con el objetivo de profundizar los conocimientos sobre esta temática e incrementar específicamente competencias para la defensa de la igualdad de género y, bueno, en la educación con personas jóvenes y adultas y los derechos de la mujer. Entonces, actualmente estamos participando de mesas de trabajo para el seguimiento de los acuerdos en cuanto a política pública, prácticas de aula e investigación. Bueno, también desde la sociedad civil creemos que la comunicación tiene que ser política, entonces hemos producido contenidos educomunicativos sobre género como soporte, ¿no?, para visibilizar estas reflexiones que tenemos como sociedad civil y el debate de género y educación. Tenemos especiales, boletines, podcasts, notas informativas que pueden revisar también en la página, y también se difunden posicionamientos, ¿no?, ante la coyuntura o cobertura de eventos en los ámbitos nacionales, regionales e internacionales. Y ahora sí paso a hablarles un poquito más sobre este proyecto que tenemos en CLADE, en alianza con Alternative y también con las coaliciones nacionales de Haití, Nicaragua y Honduras. Y es un proyecto muy, muy interesante de profundizar aquí un poquito más. Es el de estrategias para prevenir la violencia sexual y de género y fomentar la equidad en escuelas rurales. ¿Y por qué y para qué está este proyecto, no? Es porque hay una escasez de investigaciones sobre las vivencias y condiciones educativas que experimentan los niños, niñas y adolescentes de las áreas rurales de Centroamérica y Caribe. También porque persiste la violencia de género en sus vidas, ¿no?, a lo largo de toda su vida. Y también porque hay una escasez de estrategias de prevención de la violencia en escuelas rurales, específicamente. Tenemos programas para atender, sí, pero no tenemos programas para prevenir la violencia. Y ahí es donde se debe comenzar a atacar el problema, no esperar que ocurra, ¿no? Y el objetivo de este proyecto es contribuir al fortalecimiento de las estrategias de promoción para prevenir la violencia de género, ¿no? La opción es trabajar con los territorios locales, ¿no? Es hacer una investigación con las comunidades educativas, tanto con docentes, familias, estudiantes, y generar datos locales. Mi compañera anterior mencionó la importancia de que se escuchen las voces de los actores, Bueno, este proyecto escucha las voces de los actores porque trabajamos con la investigación acción participativa, que procura que tenga un trabajo sensible, de mucha reflexión, desde los propios actores en sus propias comunidades. Es decir, nosotros no llegamos y les decimos qué es lo mejor para ellos o qué es lo que tienen que hacer, sino que la reflexión viene de ellos mismos, ¿no? Estamos acompañando este proceso. Entonces, este es el corazón de este proyecto, ¿no? La investigación acción participativa, y se ubica, como ya mencioné, en Haití, Honduras y Nicaragua, y trabajamos en 2 territorios en cada uno de estos países. Y esto es lo que les hablaba, ¿no? De la comunidad de aprendizaje, a través de la investigación acción participativa, que busca tener una cercanía social en el conocimiento comunitario. Primero, ¿qué hicimos? Iniciamos la fase exploratoria creando alianzas institucionales, es decir, hablando con docentes, con directivos, sin necesidad de hablar directamente de eliminar violencia de género, ¿no? Que en América Latina y el Caribe quizá pueda tener una carga hablar de género, sobre todo en comunidades rurales, ¿no? Entonces la idea fue primero crear alianzas, conversar, que las familias, que los docentes sientan la necesidad de cambiar su realidad, ¿no? En favor a los niños, niñas y adolescentes de las comunidades. Luego hicimos una fase más de profundización de la investigación acción participativa, y ahí sí tuvimos reuniones con docentes, talleres comunitarios, para hablar un poco más sobre las problemáticas que enfrentaban los estudiantes, pero también ellos mismos, ¿no? En relación a temas de violencia. Ya luego, en una tercera fase, más cuantitativa, ¿no? La primera fue cualitativa, fue aplicar encuestas de percepción a los y las adolescentes para hablar específicamente sobre datos demográficos, estereotipos de género, el bullying, embarazo en niñas y adolescentes, castigo y prácticas nocivas y violencia sexual. Entonces, en total aplicamos 517 encuestas, 97 en Haití, 319 en Honduras y 101 en Nicaragua. También es importante mencionar acá que cada país tiene su propia realidad, entonces tenemos que adaptarnos. Si bien existe una metodología común, es importante conocer el momento histórico, cultural en el que se encuentra cada país e incluso cada comunidad. Entonces no ha sido igual en todo. Y finalmente ahora nos encontramos en una fase de lectura crítica en la que estamos aplicando ya las estrategias de prevención de violencia de género y sexual, elaboradas por las mismas comunidades con el apoyo de CLAD. Y voy a presentar muy brevemente algunos hallazgos regionales, ¿no? Efectivamente encontramos estereotipos y roles de género, ¿no? que naturalizan muchas veces estas conductas y que suponen que hay un poder diferencial para hombres versus mujeres, y estos estereotipos atraviesan los imaginarios comunitarios e individuales y tienden a explicar las diferencias que generan desigualdades e incluso aquellas extremas como el embarazo en niñas, adolescentes y violencia sexual. Después también en relación a la violencia sexual en la escuela, tenemos que cuando les hacemos la pregunta, ¿no? ¿Alguna vez han tocado tu cuerpo en la escuela o en el camino a la escuela de una forma que te ha hecho sentir mal? Bueno, tenemos acá que en Haití un 30% mencionó que sí, pero también tenemos que hay un 16% que prefirió decir que no, o sea, prefirió no responder la encuesta, ¿no? Entonces, sobre todo en Haití es la preocupación en temas de violencia sexual. Respecto al bullying también persiste mucho en las escuelas, y acá sobre todo vemos que los estudiantes denuncian estos actos de bullying a los profesores, pero no siempre los profesores tienen las herramientas para enfrentar estas problemáticas, ¿no? Respecto al embarazo en niñas y adolescentes, algo que nos sorprendió mucho es que hay mucha tolerancia social y comunitaria a relatos que producen prácticas de tutela y dominio sobre el cuerpo de las niñas y adolescentes. O sea, que los estudiantes conozcan a una compañera que está embarazada, una niña o adolescente es aceptado en cierta forma en algunas comunidades. cómo se ha naturalizado esa práctica. Y sobre castigo y prácticas nocivas, bueno, sí, efectivamente también las encontramos en las escuelas, ¿no? Y esto se agrava sobre todo en las discriminaciones de género y en la movilización de la violencia hacia la niñez, y también se ha normalizado como modelo de crianza. Es como muchas veces los docentes nos decían, la única manera de corregir es castigando, ¿no? O no hago nada o castigo. Entonces, a veces quizá puedan olvidarse que entre el castigo muy duro y el no hacer nada, en el centro tenemos muchas opciones que son importantes revisar para poder trabajar con estudiantes, ¿no? Y finalmente, ¿hacia dónde vamos? Bueno, el objetivo de CLAD y específicamente este proyecto es seguir creando alianzas intersectoriales y multiactoriales. También buscamos un cambio de patrones culturales y de construcción de estereotipos en clave intergeneracional, intercultural y de género. Eso es muy importante, creemos que la investigación acción participativa puede ayudar mucho a esto, ¿no? A que los propios actores se sientan escuchados, sientan que ellos están haciendo el cambio, porque solamente así esto va a ser sostenible, ¿no? O sea, nosotros en algún momento nos iremos, pero ellos seguirán poniendo en práctica esas estrategias. Entonces, esa es la idea de contar con proyectos de prevención. Y también este proyecto busca desnaturalizar el castigo de las prácticas nocivas, la violencia de género y violencia sexual, y romper el silencio para generar movimiento y crear sentido para la transformación. Muchas gracias.
Yeah. Thank you, Gabriela. Before we move to the other speakers, Teresa would like to excuse herself. So Teresa, does anyone have questions, pertaining questions with regards to Teresa from FAWA's presentation? Okay, I see one of the attendees, Charlotte. Salma, can Charlotte be upgraded to a panelist speaker to ask the question, please? Okay. Salma.
Humza, sorry, I missed that. You need Charlotte to be upgraded?
Yes, she needs to ask a question.
Yes, it's done. You can ask her to speak.
Hi, Charlotte.
So can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for all the interesting presentations. And I just had a question to Teresa around the policy work and the reintegration of pregnant girls and teenage mothers. So if the policy work really hasn't worked as of now, so what would you suggest as next steps? What is it we need to engage in? How do we need to make sure, or how can we make sure that this group of vulnerable learners are really brought back into school to complete their education? Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Charlotte, for the question. There are countries that have had some success. For example, Zambia. We've also had some success in Kenya. And what we would do is, how do we then get the other chapters to, not chapters, but governments to adopt what is working? Our intention moving forward is to showcase as much as possible the countries that have had some success. Of course, they're not at 100%, but in Zambia, it's clear. The girl is out of school. She comes back after delivery. She still has peace in a classroom. Some countries are struggling with not inviting them back into the same school, but transferring them to another school. The idea is that she should be able to be in school. I know Nigeria is struggling also, especially in the northern parts, where most of the girls are beyond just having been teenage pregnant, they were married off, but they still want to come back to school. So what, moving forward, the question you ask is, try and showcase as much as possible those countries that have been able to do something about it and they have success. Because what I see is that most countries are still fearful. They look at this as, we are not sure what this would look like for our schools. But what we are trying to say is that every person needs a second chance. These girls need a second chance, and they are already in big numbers. If we leave them out and they do not complete their education, then we are creating a society, a challenge for the future of our society. And the last one would be to try and also share some of these entry policies. We already have one, African Union proposed on how the governments can adopt, to get as many governments to adopt these policies, domesticate it in their countries, so that we are able to have, you know, as many governments as possible practicing how to get these girls back in school. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Teresa and Charlotte. Any questions for Teresa before she leaves? Okay, nothing. So for the interest of time, I will go to the next speaker, which is from Ungai Eileen, who will be taking us through her presentation. Eileen.
Thank you, Pumza. Thank you. My name is Eileen Versluis. I'm with Ungai, the United Nations Girls Education Initiative, and I'm very happy to be part of this learning community. Let me try to get my presentation up. I'm happy to be part of this learning community because not only because of the learning, but I think, Fumza, you said it so well at the beginning, there's this growing resistance and backlash towards gender equality. And I think in order to be able to tackle that resistance, we need to learn from each other, but we also need to start working together. We cannot do this on our own. So I'm really hopeful that this community will also be a community of joint action. So with that, I'm very happy to share our experiences from the Gender at the Center initiative, which is actually an initiative that has grown out of the GRESP approach that we're talking about today. So very happy to share some of the learnings and experiences we had through this initiative. And I hope that what we've learned, but also the tools that we developed through this initiative will be helpful for your work in your respective contexts. So this initiative is an initiative that was launched in 2019 at the G7 meeting in France as an initiative, a multi-stakeholder initiative with a very bold ambition to promote gender equality in and through education. And so, as I said, rooted in this GRESP approach. The GRESP approach, I think you all know, is really a whole system approach to make sure that gender equality is embedded at the core of education systems. So right from the start of education sector planning, going into budgeting and the whole cycle of implementation and monitoring and evaluation. So really making sure that gender is embedded in that whole education system, and that from there we will achieve gender equality in and through education. And so this initiative is implemented currently in 8 countries, mostly in West and Central Africa. What is nice about the initiative is that it's an alliance. We're not doing this on our own. So the initiative is being coordinated by Ungai and IEP UNESCO, but with the support of a very broad alliance of members. So some of you might have heard already, the GCE Alliance has a civil society consortium made up of ANCEFA, FAWE, and PLAN. We have the ministries of education of our 8 partner countries. We have technical partners like GPE, UNICEF, and UNESCO. We have the African Union in there, and also the G7 donors. So it's a very active community of partners, and I think that relates to what I said at the beginning. We need that community and that partnership to be able to tackle a very sensitive issue that is gender equality. What we think is unique and transformational about this approach is that it really wants to take a systems approach, because we know that when you're working on gender equality in education, it's not enough to just work on projects, on specific levels of the education system. You need to tackle the education system as a whole. You need to work on what we call both supply and demand side factors of gender equality. And what we try to do within the initiative is really drilling down to the root causes of gender inequality, which we all know that's the social norms that keep girls and also boys from reaching their full potential. So we really try to tackle those root causes and try to transform those harmful gender norms, both within governments and within communities. Because I think, Penny, you said it so beautifully, these harmful gender norms, they very often start within the homes, but they spread through the school and through the whole government system. So even within the government system, we have mindsets that need to shift in order to be able to achieve gender equality. So that's what we're trying to do, really tackle those social norms at all levels and working, as I said, through a true partnership. And so what we're doing within the initiative is really working on two big areas. We have one area where we work with ministries of education, and there we try to implement the GRESP approach, build capacity on the GRESP approach, making sure that people within the ministry have the technical capacity to embed gender equality in education plans, budgets, and policies. But not only the technical capacity, we try to focus also a lot on what some of the other speakers have also emphasized, the political will, because we will not get anywhere without the political will. You can have very technically very capable people within the ministry, but when it gets blocked at the highest levels because people don't believe in genuine gender equality, then we will get nowhere. So we also work a lot on raising that political will, advocacy, and building true partnerships and leadership within the ministries for gender equality. So that's one part of the initiative. The other part is working on the enabling environment around the governments. So that's all of our work with civil society, communities, local education groups. And there we're doing a lot of work on transforming social norms within the communities, civil society partners advocating towards the government, and also really trying to bridge that gap between civil society and government officials so that we are really working together towards a common goal. So that's also one of our goals within this initiative. And so we've been working now for almost 3 years. We're in the last year of the first phase of this initiative, and we have achieved quite some results. For example, on the GRESP and the transformative leadership training, we've trained over 600 ministry officials across those 8 countries, over 400 civil society actors. And we've also been doing a lot of work on high-level advocacy. And you might have heard of the Freetown Manifesto, which is really a big win of this initiative. It's the first ever African-led manifesto on gender equality in and through education. So we now have a high-level political commitment from the ministers of education of 14 African countries committing to mainstreaming gender equality in their education systems. So that's a big win, and I hope in your work you will be able to build on that manifesto and hold your leaders accountable to the commitments in that manifesto. Another big thing that we're doing is supporting countries in doing gender assessments. So we have developed a tool that is called the Gender Equality in Education Snapshot tool, and it helps both civil society and government partners to really get a sense of where the country stands with regard to gender equality in and through education. So it's a very easy to use interactive tool that gives you an overview, a snapshot of the situation of your country with regard to gender equality in education. So that's something that we're rolling out in a lot of countries and that I hope will be helpful in your work as well when you want to do that kind of gender assessment. Of course, we're doing also targeted technical support, and this has resulted in some great impact in some of the countries. We have, for example, now in Sierra Leone, a fully gender responsive education sector plan. We have gender responsive education sector analyses, for example, in Mauritania. So these are things that we're also continuing to support governments on. As I said, we're doing a lot of community engagement on girls' education and social norms, and we have a whole series of tools and research reports that you can access and use in your work. And so to finalize, I would want to focus on two of those activities that we're doing within the Gender at the Center initiative, because I think they might be particularly helpful for your work. So one is our training offer on gender transformative leadership. As I said, this is really one of the pillars of the GCI to try to work on that political leadership and political commitment within the governments. So we had a series of trainings. And for example, this picture is from a training we did last year in Dakar, where we brought together senior government officials from the ministries of education, but also the ministries of finances from the French-speaking West African countries. And we offered them more than a training, I would say maybe even a coaching approach, where people could really be set in a very safe environment to question their own gender biases, to talk about gender equality in their own work and life, and to develop leadership skills to bring forward the gender equality agenda within their institutions. And so we had really great results of people saying, for example, that now they've had their heart and brain together, so they really have the skills now to become a gender champion in their institutions. And for example, at the end of the meeting, almost all of the participants declared themselves feminist education leaders. So I think this speaks of the mind shifts that we were able to establish within those government spaces. And lastly, so the GEST toolkit that I presented, just for you to know that this is a very user-friendly toolkit that you can find on our website and you can start working with it. And so we've piloted that in a couple of African countries, and we had very good results in high-level officials also saying that this tool is very helpful for them and really starting to integrate those gender data in their education sector planning. So many countries are now starting to use those data to inform, for example, their partnership compacts with GPE, their education sector analysis, or their education sector plans. So this is a very practical tool that can help countries to really do more on gender equality, raise awareness, but then also take it forward into actual implementation. So with that, I thank you, and please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We are here to support and to share all of our learnings. So thank you very much, and let's keep in touch. Thanks.
Thank you, Eileen. Very interesting and insightful presentation. The next speaker, speaking of partnership compacts, is from GPE. Their name is George, and they will be taking us through basically what does GPE mean in terms of gender hardwiring, what are the critical ways that we could use their approach to gender inclusion in terms of advocating for systems transformation, ensuring that we have responsive systems, particularly targeting country level work. Hi, George, the floor is yours.
Hello, thank you so much. I just want to confirm that you can see my my screen, my slides, and that you can see me and hear me. Yes. Okay, well, thank you so much. My name is Jorge Colin. I'm as you mentioned, I work with the Global Partnership for Education, working on gender equality. And I'm sorry, I think I had a small cut in my video. I work with the Global Partnership for Education on gender equality. As means of introduction, the Global Partnership for Education is the largest fund and partnership solely dedicated to education, working with close to 90 partner countries around the world, mainly low, middle low, and small island states. So when discussing gender equality and gender responsive education sector planning, I think a very important first step that has been tackled through different ways by my colleagues, the panelists, is how do we understand gender equality in education? And the way we're trying to approach this within our operating model in GPE is through three dimensions. access. So gender equality in access to education, ensuring that we are challenging and that we are addressing the underlying causes of exclusion, particularly for the most marginalized children, regardless of their gender. Gender equality within education. So as it has been mentioned, for example, by Penny, the issue of pedagogy, curricula, textbooks, making safe spaces for all children to learn, making the schools safe spaces. Really, when my colleagues from FAWE highlighted the issue of conflict and the interactions between conflict, gender, education, for me that really rang a bell in terms of the basics or the importance of the commitments to making schools safe spaces to be. And finally, gender equality through education. So using education as a tool to advance gender equality, to advance the priorities of or the aspirations of gender equality of our partner countries, right? And I think that's something very important, as my colleague and friend Elena from GCI highlighted, working as a partnership, working together, and really putting education as a tool to achieve these high level societal goals. Now, while I don't necessarily want to go into every detail of how we're trying to approach system transformation, I do think it's important, whether we talk about system transformation or whether we talk about education sector planning, that we really try to engage it as a cycle, as a process. So to take the example of the education sector planning process, sometimes we talk about the education sector plan. So the documents, let's say that may say Senegal Education Sector Plan 2020-2025 or 2030. And that's certainly a very important reference, but it's important to acknowledge that there is a whole process behind, meaning we are continually in this education sector planning process. We are continually in this budgeting process, including the role of gender responsive education, gender responsive budgeting, gender responsive public expenditure management. And we're also continually in a dynamic system of education system transformation. So we need to start by assessing and diagnosis what are the key barriers, putting some priorities in place, aligning as partners. We are, as opposed to trying to tackle the problems individually, trying to really align, work together into what we understand as the key challenges, and then really put action together, learn from what we are doing, and adapt as we learn. Previously, some of my other colleagues also highlighted the work of different partners in this, including civil society, universities, students, and that really speaks to me personally, and to GP as an organization, in terms of how can we incorporate gender equality into the prioritization process that for GP partner countries leads to the creation of a country compact, but that is relevant for a country compact or for an education sector plan or a girls' education strategy, and really starts by having an inclusive dialogue, inclusive in terms of the different actors in the table, and inclusive in terms of the different topics that are to be discussed. Having a discussion that is supported by a gender analysis, meaning that we are building really on the evidence that's in place and the richness of the perspectives between between different actors, like the sessions that Eileen highlighted. That we are including a discussion on gender equality as a these three dimensions that I try to mention: gender equality to education, within education, and through education, as a cross-cutting priority. One of the main risks, in my view, is when gender equality is isolated as a separate component. So when you see, for me, a red flag is when you see, a session on teachers, a session on schools, and a session on gender equality. And that's, in my view, a red flag, because gender equality is not separate of the work that the partner countries do on teachers, or that they do on school infrastructure. It's rather really a cross-cutting issue on teacher training, on teacher development, on ensuring that the pedagogical approach responds to different needs, the needs of different students, etc. Then having a priority reform or reforms that work at the system level. So trying really to advance not only specific elements of provision, which are of course important, or service delivery, but rather trying to really transform the system. And finally, not finally, and learning from previous initiatives. So it's in our discussions, sometimes we put a lot of focus on the innovation, but we don't necessarily put a lot of focus on reviewing what has happened and what worked well. And that's a big piece of what sometimes people call like gray literature research, which is gaining, I think, a lot of attention within the discussion on implementation research. And finally, as you see in the central, what this brings together really is the issue of ownership and ensuring that the priorities and the discussions that are taking place are being owned at a country level. Because no matter how good the plan is, no matter how rich the prioritization is, if we as a partnership, if we don't have the ownership of government, of civil society, of the day-to-day actors that make these priorities a reality, then there's really nothing to do. This has to be owned, and I think that's a key driver of our work on gender equality and in other thematic areas. Thank you so much.
Thank you, George. I'm going to open the floor for question and answer session. So if anyone has questions for any of the panelists, please raise your hand and then we'll just upgrade you. And just to say that Penny Shabalala had to excuse himself due to class commitments, so he's not on the call. Any questions? Nothing. Let's see.
So we have someone in the audience. I think it's Ali Bachu. I'm just allowing him to speak.
Yes.
He can go ahead and open his microphone.
Thank you so much. Do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. You can speak.
I have some questions to the previous speaker, to the lady.
Eileen from Ungarn.
Yeah, okay. Usually when we assume that we follow the systems approach and gender is mainstreamed in education plans, what we observed in the past is that it becomes the concern of no one, unless it is being focused and given to some departments or responsible organizations. That will be just like more of a lip service. So what did you do to overcome this challenge? Second question is, from our practices, unless community is highly engaged, gender equity in education cannot be achieved, because community has usually, especially in rural areas, less attitude towards educating girls. There is high preference to boys than to girls. There are lots of cultural barriers, abduction, early marriage, housework, and the like. So how did you manage to engage communities, especially community leaders, parent-teacher association, even the religious organizations? And the third question is gender equality in education. I feel that it's not only the task of the Minister of Education. Did you manage to involve other sector ministries, such as the Ministry of Women Affairs, Ministry of Health, Ministry of Social Affairs? Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for these questions. Very, very relevant questions, and I'll try to answer them all. So the first question, gender mainstreaming, I totally agree. I think maybe I might have not have explained the full extent to it, but what we do within the initiative is work on both mainstreaming, but then also the development of targeted strategies. I think you need both. And I think there is value of mainstreaming, as Jorge said, to make sure that all of the aspects of the education sector plan are informed by gender analysis and are gender responsive. But you also need targeted strategies, just as you said, to make sure that it doesn't get, that's the big risk with mainstreaming, that it gets lost and that it's the concern of everybody, but the concern of nobody. So you also need targeted strategies and also targeted people within the ministry, like gender units, for example, to take on those strategies. And then with regard to those gender units, what we try to do is make sure that they're really empowered, because what we often see within ministries of education is that gender is put somewhere in a corner with like a 2-person gender unit that doesn't have the budget, doesn't have the power, and doesn't have the authority to really take the gender education agenda forward. So that's also some of our advocacy work, to make sure that gender is really put at the right level within the ministry. So that's it for the first question. Second question, I also totally agree. So that's really I would say the core of this initiative. It's to work both at the government level and at the community level, because of course, as you say, we're very much aware that if you work on very nice policies and strategies and plans, but if the community doesn't believe in what you're trying to achieve, then it will never succeed. We have seen that, for example, or we are currently seeing that in Sierra Leone, where they have a very progressive policy on inclusion with a re-entry policy for pregnant girls and adolescent mothers. But there's a lot of resistance within the communities, a lot of pressure on pregnant girls to not return to school, a lot of bullying, a lot of stigmatization of pregnant girls who want to return to school. So it's absolutely essential to work on that community level. And how we are doing that is to, as you say, work with community influencers. It could be religious leaders, it could be young activists, it could be role models within the community. And what we're trying to do is to really go down to that level of gender norms, because what we have seen is that you can have very superficial level sensitization activities on girls' education, but the effect of that is very often people just start reproducing the discourse. They say, yeah, it's important to bring our girls to school, but they don't actually believe in the importance of girls really reaching their full potential, being able to dream of whatever they want to dream. So you really need to tackle those root causes and those deep-rooted beliefs about what it is that the role of a girl is in the community, what's the role of a woman in the community. And that's a process that takes time, of course. You don't change those mindsets over time. So we do that with a long-term investment in communities, but also really with a dialogue approach. We don't want to come in with like fully fledged messages, really trying to have like a long-term dialogue with central people within the communities. And the last question, also a very relevant one, on other ministries. Yes, we want to engage. So for example, as I said, that training on gender transformative leadership, we have engaged ministries of finances. We are constantly trying to make the linkages between the education ministry and health, gender, social affairs ministries, because you're very right in saying this is a cross-sectoral issue. We will not fix the issue by focusing on education alone. Things like child marriage, adolescent pregnancies, it's absolutely vital to get gender and health ministries on board. I'm not saying that's easy, because very often governments work in silos, the budgets are siloed, so that's really a work in progress and we're not there yet. But yeah, we acknowledge the fact that this is absolutely essential and we're constantly trying to find new ways to do that. Thanks so much. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Eileen. I see George's hand is up. From my side, Eileen, I just would like clarity on the GES rapid assessment tool that you adapted in collaboration with GPE. How can one access that? Because we have coalitions or civil society actors who are participating in the local education group, and we always try to sort of integrate these things so that we can also measure and ensure that there's inclusivity and we're advocating for gender as well. So is this still in planning process, or this is something that's been implemented already?
Yeah, thanks, Pumza. No, the tool is ready to use. So it's on our website. You can download it. You can just download it and start using it. It's a very user-friendly tool. So anyone, you don't need to be a data specialist to start using it. There's a whole user manual included in the tool. So it's really easy. You can just download it from our website and use it. And it's also set up in a way that you can adapt it to your local context. So for example, if you feel like there's an indicator missing there, you can just easily integrate it into the tool. You can also integrate more decentralized levels to put in data there. So yeah, just an invitation to all of you to go to the website that is in this presentation, and I'll share it in the chat as well, and start using it. And if ever you need any help in using it, then of course we'll be here to assist. Thank you.
Thank you, Eileen. George, your hand is up.
Thank you. Actually, I actually wanted to, if possible, to add a bit on the first question raised, which I agree it's quite good, and a very an approach that I think can work well is if there is a results framework to make sure that there are elements specific to gender equality, or to the deliverables on gender equality within the relevant results agreement or results framework of the different areas. So if mainstreaming means working, let's say, across 5-6 directorates, make sure that these 5-6 directorates also have elements on gender equality within the results framework. Because otherwise, as it has been highlighted, it becomes let's say a responsibility of everyone that it turns into the responsibility of no one, really. Thank you.
Thank you, George. My other question is to Gabriela. Gabriela, just one question with regards to, I know you mentioned the research work that you guys are doing and the active participation, which the learning community in terms of the regional space. Now, where after has this research sort of been taken to engage in the countries that you see some extremely shocking results, for instance, Haiti or Honduras? How has been the government interaction in terms of sort of using evidence-based advocacy to engage Honduras or Haiti? And what has been the progress of building a relationship in terms of that with the public sector?
Yes, thanks, Pumza, for the question. Well, it is really important that communities develop and adapt their own strategies, of course, with support at the beginning. But what has not worked in the Latin America and the Caribbean is to create a single formula without adapting it to the territory. So we create awareness workshop about how to prevent gender and sexual violence with policymakers and stakeholders. And of course, it was really difficult because each country has different problems, different social issues. And for example, we created alliances with regional governments. It's not necessary with, in Honduras, yes, with the Ministry of Education, but in Haiti, it was different because the situation of the country is really difficult too. So it was with regional territories. And well, in Nicaragua, it was difficult too. And we created alliances with leader communities, women leader communities. And each alliance were different in each country.
Thanks, Gabriela. We also have a question on the chat that's saying, what about advocacy or awareness raising in regards to disability mainstreaming, especially girls with disabilities? Does any of the panelists want to answer that question?
Yeah, maybe I can just shortly answer. I think that's also a very relevant question. And what we've seen in our work is indeed girls with disabilities, but also boys with disabilities, trying to integrate those vulnerabilities, right? And I think that also comes back to what we've been saying on diversity. What we try to achieve is to make sure that education systems are responsive to the diverse need of different learners. And so when you work on gender transformative education, this includes working on needs of children with disabilities, LGBTQ children, all different types of learners. So it's really raising a sense of awareness with teachers, with planners on these needs, and also integrating that in your analyses. So for example, in the toolkit, you will see that there's also indicators on accessibility, on inclusion for disability and learners with disabilities. So yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And we're trying to integrate that as much as we can in everything we do. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Eileen. We've reached the end of our session. I'd like to thank the panelist speakers for taking their time and for really being responsive and sharing the good expert advice. We really look forward to engaging you more, to collaborating with you more on our learning communities and many aspects of GCE. Also like to thank the participants, the interpreters, and everyone who supported us in coordinating this. We will be sending out a communique through the members mail on how you can actively join the learning community and how you can as well as get access to reports, to specific links, as well as presentations that were shared today. Happy Africa Day. It's the 25th of May, so it's Africa Day today. And I hope you have a lovely afternoon or morning and for the rest of your day. Thank you. Have a good night.